Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the recent High Court judgment that has concluded the government broke the law in abandoning care homes in England at the start of the COVID pandemic. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So before I go over some of the various strands of this, so let us be clear about what exactly this High Court judgment is. Because there's always lots of things in this. A High Court judgment on a particular case can find the government have been naughty in one area, not so much in others, all nuanced. But first of all, this verdict is that the government acted unlawfully in failing to protect care home residents. So we're not saying it was, in hindsight, a poor policy choice. We're not saying mistakes were made, but they were trying their best in difficult and unexpected circumstances. In fact, the court judgment specifically says this was not a finely balanced political judgment because the Secretary of State specifically didn't consider certain things that they should have. The High Court said they acted unlawfully. That meant there were legal procedures in place that were deliberately not followed. It was deliberate. Second, as a consequence of the policy, we know that COVID ran amok in our care homes. Never mind the protective ring thrown around care homes, these are the easiest places to isolate from the virus. That doesn't mean easy, but easiest. The residents can be isolated from others. Families can be kept physically apart, could still have followed the lead of other countries and had like visitor cabins with windows between to allow meetings but no physical contamination of the air. Staff is trickier, but we could have helped out by making sure they had the PPE they needed from the start and adopted practices that minimise their contact with others. We also could have introduced a robust testing protocol. We've had this all over as well. This isn't even just the Westminster government. You know, the Scottish government did the same thing, said that they were testing carers each week, and then it turned out they weren't at all for some time. Should have happened. The court also attacked that failure. Third, as a consequence of COVID running rampant in our care homes, we know that tens of thousands of residents died. Given that the court has ruled the policies unlawful, how can we conclude anything other than that they died unnecessarily? That a government acting unlawfully failed to save them, whereas a government that had acted lawfully would have saved many of them. Not all of them. When people sort of say, oh, the Conservatives have killed X 10,000s of people, it's like, no, people would have died. It's a pandemic, right? But many fewer would have died if we'd have done things right. Because let's be clear here, nobody is saying we could have saved everyone from the pandemic. Some people are, they shouldn't be. You know, I've spoken many times in the past about how we had certain advantages. We're an island. We get a lot more warning than other advanced nations to prepare. Both our chief medical officer and chief scientific advisor are experts in infectious diseases. The last Labour government produced documents of lessons learned after SARS, the last scary coronavirus outbreak. The current Conservative government, they weren't idle either. They ran an exercise called Operation Cygnus that came up with recommendations for what to do in the event of a global viral pandemic. We had a lot going for us. We had weakness too, yes, like a decade of Tory cuts to the NHS, which hampered us, but we still had a lot of advantages, a lot of cards to play. We pissed every single one of them away. This judgment doesn't seem to be getting much attention, but the inevitable sequence here is that the government unlawfully permitted the untimely deaths of tens of thousands of our citizens, and do you know what? Their attitude is not much changed now. In fact, they're trying to kill even more of us. Then on to some specific points. So the Health Secretary at the time was, of course, Matt Hancock. He and his department have broken the law multiple times in their dealing with the COVID pandemic, as backed up by the High Court numerous times. With the latest and most damning example, he is again denying that he did anything wrong. He's trying to blame his officials by the sounds of it. He claims it was the fault of Public Health England for sending patients to care homes without COVID tests. He also claims he was not told about the risk of asymptomatic transmission. However, not only did I know and report on the fact that patients were being discharged from hospitals into care homes without a negative COVID test, but also that people were talking of asymptomatic transmission before the UK even had its first confirmed case. In fact, there are minutes from a SAGE meeting, this is the group of scientific advisors to the government, from January talking about the risk of asymptomatic transmission. It was formal government policy to discharge patients into care homes without the need for a negative COVID test. Now, the policy was withdrawn, but much later on. So I can't link you to the actual policy now because I got rid of it. But I can link you to not only a Twitter post, which has a copy as it existed at the time, but also in the description below, I can link the video that I did with this back in May, where I had images in the background of the actual guidance as it was. And I quote from this guidance, formal government guidance. Negative tests are not required prior to transfers / admissions into the care home. That was government policy set by Matt Hancock's department. That means set by Hancock himself, because no official would dare issue guidance like that without a ministerial direction. To be claiming otherwise now, when it's a demonstrable lie, is playing on the fact few people will fact check his statements. A bit like the Daily Mail at the moment. But he did know. He was the Secretary of State. And he will have insisted on that policy because no official would have done that, would have carried that policy out. The situation was this. After a decade of undermining our NHS, our capacity was woefully inadequate. COVID patients spend way longer in hospital than for many other common reasons, certainly in intensive care, we know that. Our hospitals were getting overwhelmed. Yes, they built the Nightingale hospitals for extra capacity, but although they had beds and equipment, we didn't have actually the staff to run them. So they weren't used at all. There were no staff, there were no nurses, no doctors. Wasn't even usable. It was just a PR gimmick. That's all it was. So what do? The NHS is about to collapse. You need more capacity. There's not enough staff. What do you do? Now, I don't know what options he was given. I'm not a healthcare expert of any kind, and certainly not an expert in emergency planning of this sort. But Hancock will have been given options. The one he chose was to discharge elderly patients back into care homes. To facilitate this policy, he created guidance that read that such patients didn't need to have a negative COVID test because the chances are a lot of them would have been COVID positive. So if you had a policy of discharging elderly patients to care homes as soon as possible, but they still needed a negative COVID test, that's not going to help clear your backlog in hospitals. So it's just like we just need to get rid of... As soon as they're well enough to be carried out, we need them out. That's what he chose to do. It's crystal clear from the High Court judgment and the actual government policy of his department at the time. And like I said, Hancock has been found to have acted unlawfully multiple times now. Courts have said he broke the law over pandemic contracts. The PPE VIP lane was unlawful. It was unlawful to appoint Dido Harding to the role where she blew more money than Musk has on Twitter. We could have bought Twitter for that. On a test and trace system that not only didn't work, but a parliamentary investigation has concluded didn't even help. And now his department acted unlawfully over their failure to protect care home residents. For all the attention on Boris Johnson's law breaking right now, it must be remembered many senior Tory MPs have been breaking the law. Not always criminal law like Johnson or Sunak, but does that matter when you're talking about leaders of your government? Matt Hancock unlawfully let tens of thousands of our loved ones die. The current Health Secretary has questions to answer about whether he's obeyed tax laws. Our Chancellor, as well as breaking criminal law, may also have broken tax laws. Our Home Secretary has broken employment law. Our Northern Ireland Secretary has broken international law, although, remember, in a specific and limited way, he says. And we all suffer from this in one way or another. Those who suffered personal loss have clearly paid the price for allowing pirates to run our government. But the rest of us suffer as well. Seeps into our whole society. We suffer reputational loss abroad. We suffer from lower standards of living and life expectancy because we have a government that does not care about our standard of living and life expectancy. Only profit for them. We suffer from fewer opportunities for the next generation. Lost all our freedoms. They are collapsing everything around us. Our healthcare, our education, law and order, the very air we breathe. Cannot tell you how upset it makes me to hear about the way this government treated us during a national emergency and that when it all comes out, a High Court judgment can't be argued with. It's not even been reported prominently in the news. And not all news media is covering for the government. Don't think, the media just, distracting us. There are parts of the mainstream media, far too few, where they do want to report things that are of public interest. So the fact that, and they are reporting this, but not prominently. So the fact it's not prominent means the only conclusion we can draw is that in their opinion, the public aren't all that bothered. It wouldn't attract much attention if they stuck it on the front page. It's like this government creates so many catastrophes, people just become desensitised to them. And I'll finish by saying that if you want to hear a lawyer's view of this, and you probably should, then I'll link David Alan Green's blog post on it below, along with everything else. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And until next time, I'll see you later.